So I haven't been hiding it. I love my Copic markers. But I've been getting quite a few comments complaining that I've abandoned my Ohuhu markers. And today that changes. So I'm going to be drawing on this small piece of paper. I don't know what size it is. I didn't measure it. What's that saying? It's like measure twice, cut once. But if you don't really care what size it turns out, you don't have to measure, you just cut. So that's what I did. And I'm using my Prismacolor Col-Erase pencil in pink because I've talked about this a lot. I like the way it looks under the Copic markers. It's just cute and beautiful. And this shape and size kind of forced me to draw a character in a very interesting squashed pose. And of the first attempt, I didn't really like the layout, so I erased it. And I'm using a brand new kneaded eraser. I've talked about kneaded erasers a lot on this channel. I love them. But this is the Koh-i-Noor one, and it just sort of breaks into pieces and they don't squash back together. I don't know if I got a faulty one or if I just don't like this brand. So I don't recommend the Koh-i-Noor kneaded eraser. I really like the cheap ones that you get at the grocery store. They seem to be more squashy. And that's what I like in a kneaded eraser. Anyway, on the second attempt at the drawing, I'm doing the exact same thing, but, you know, better. It's kind of like the hindsight 2020 thing, you know, your first attempt, you're like, oh, I messed up in all these different things. So then when you erase it, you can do a better job because you remember all the things that you messed up on. Eh? Yeah. There was some adult figure in my life when I was younger, and I don't really remember who it was, but they looked down upon people who erased and told me that erasing was like one of the most worstest things that you could ever do. And now that I've got a little bit more experience, I understand where they were coming from, but I also understand the benefits of erasing. So like erasing can be a terrible thing when you're beginning as an artist and you're erasing like the entirety of a drawing when you've already spent like 30 minutes on it. And erasing at that point can bring a lot of emotional damages, because I specifically remember the way it felt when you spent a lot of time on something and then you just hated it and you erased it. And that's no good for anyone. Like, just turn the page and start again at that point. Cause you're erasing and then the tears are flowing and you just feel awful, and then the water's ruining the paper, and then the eraser just goes straight through the paper, and then you end up with a big pile of shrapnel. It's just no good. And imagine, when I was 14, I really didn't like any of my art. I enjoyed making it, but I didn't really like the way it looked when I was done with it. Imagine if I had erased all that. I wouldn't have any reference to look back on and see where I was and see my progress. Now that I'm more experienced and I understand the benefits of erasing is more for like small mistakes that you've done on the paper or early on in the drawing process when you see what you've done and you know exactly what you did wrong and you have that experience as an artist to know what to fix. And then you can, you know, erase and fix that mistake like I mentioned earlier, which is what I did today. So there's definitely benefits to both sides, erasing and not erasing. And I think we all know as individuals what's probably going to suit us best. If erasing is making you feel really, really sad, just turn the page and start another drawing. If you're erasing because you know, oh, I know exactly what I need to do to fix this, bingo, I think that's the best way to go about it. Either way, I'm not judging anyone who erases or doesn't erase. Some of my favorite drawings that I ever made with Ohuhu markers were of a brand new character named Wheels that I just came up with like in the last couple months. So when I think of Ohuhu markers, I always think of this character. So that is who I'm going to be drawing today, and I can use the exact same colors that I've always used, so they're going to be spot on and perfect. So I'm very excited to be putting a bit more detail into a drawing with her, because I tend to use Ohuhu markers in my sketchbooks a lot, and with solid blocks of color and splashes of color and just, you know, so there's color in the sketchbook and it's not a boring graphite sketchbook. I mean, not that all graphite sketchbooks are boring, I just enjoy that of color. So what's special about today's video is I'm going to be putting a lot more time into this drawing and using Ohuhu. I'm not sure, looking back, I don't think I've ever done like a full sit down, spend a couple hours with my Ohuhu markers. I think I've only ever used them in sketchbooks and like maybe at max like an hour-long drawing. So this is going to be an experiment, definitely. And since I've been using my Copic markers so much, I feel like I've learned a lot about markers, and something that I didn't quite learn when I had Ohuhu because I was only using them for sketches and things, and it was kind of like a crutch, and I wasn't learning anymore with the markers because I was just using them the way I had always used like highlighters in my sketchbook. And I think moving on to Copic has definitely impacted the way I use markers. So in a recent video, I talked about how Copic markers were affecting my art, and to summarize that quickly so you don't have to go back and watch it, I've owned Ohuhu markers for a few years now, and like I've used them on and off and I've really liked them, but it wasn't until I got Copic markers that I realized how much fun markers could be. So now, as an experiment, I wanted to go back to my Ohuhu markers and see if I'm able to do those things that came so easily with a Copic marker that I never really experienced with my Ohuhu in the past. And that comes down to a lot of like blending and things. And with my Copic markers, I have Copic sketch markers, and if you didn't know, those are dual tip. One end has a chisel nib and the other has a brush nib, the coveted brush nib. This contrasts with my Ohuhu markers because currently they only sell them with a chisel and a bullet nib. Brush nibs aren't exactly a brush on the end, but they're just a very flexible round nib, I would call it. And they're very helpful when it comes to blending and blending out a color and creating a soft gradient between two colors. And it's a little harder to do when it comes to a chisel or a bullet nib. But now that I have experience with the brush nib and I've kind of come to know what it takes to blend these two colors or to blend out a color, I've kind of been able to use Ohuhu in a way that replicates a Copic marker, if that makes any sense. How I always used to use Ohuhu markers was just for flat colors and like simple cell shading, I would say. And then when I moved to Copic markers, blending just came so easily that it felt like I needed to blend because it was so much fun. And like it just sort of starts blending, even if you're trying to do the cell shading, it sort of becomes a blended, and then you're like, ooh, I'm going to push that even farther and continue to blend and blend and blend. So now I have more experience with the blending, and so now that I'm moving back to Ohuhu, where blending doesn't come as easily, I can still get it to blend. Does that make sense? Well, it's alright. I'm going to explain what I do to get it to blend, even though it doesn't come as easy. So if you have Ohuhu markers, you'll be able to do it too. I think the biggest thing I've learned going back to Ohuhu after using Copic is you need to understand the difference between the bullet nib and the chisel nib on the Ohuhu. So with the bullet nib, it's obviously for fine points, and the chisel tip is for wider, like coloring wider sections. But there's a bit more to it that I've realized now that I've gone back after using a Copic marker. So what I've noticed is the bullet nib is definitely a bit on the drier side, and the chisel nib is on the wetter side. So if you want to blend things more severely, you would use the chisel nib because it has a lot more ink and there's just a lot more, you know, fluid there that you can use to blend out the color. Whereas the bullet nib is a bit drier and you can use it to make those fine points, or you can use it to create more subtle blending. And the way I do this is, like you'll notice that I did with the skin. The cheeks are the most blended of anything else that you'll see on this drawing. And what I did was I used only two colors. I had a skin tone and I had a blush tone. And what I did was I colored in the entire section of her face with the chosen skin tone. And then I used the blush tone and I used the bullet nib and I created little circles on her cheeks. Then I switched back to the skin tone that I had chosen, flipped it over to the chisel nib, and just began blending and blending and blending and blending. And the liquid from the chisel nib created a much more smooth gradient, as you can see when you look at her cheeks. Now for underneath her chin, I used that same blush color for shading under the chin, but when I blended it out, I used so I'm gonna keep confusing these. I used the bullet nib to blend it out so that the blending isn't as soft, and there's a bit harsher of a line, but it's still pretty soft. Does that make sense? I think so. I also used the bullet nib to blend the wrinkles you'll see around her armpit where the shirt is really baggy. There's some thin lines that I drew in with a darker color to create those shadows and those creases. And then I switched back to the lighter color of the shirt and I used the bullet nib and blended that out, and you'll see it's not quite as smooth and blended as like her cheeks are. I'm hoping this makes sense. I guess I'll probably need to make a tutorial if it doesn't, so do let me know. I was hoping that maybe I could just get away with explaining it, but I'm not even entirely sure what I just said, so hopefully it made sense. If not, let me know. I'll make like a actual real-time tutorial and show you the different techniques that I can do because Ohuhu has both the chisel and the bullet nib. This video is just meant to be a speed paint. This is turning into a really terribly put together tutorial. Oops. Now another reason I am drawing with my Ohuhu markers today is because I'm planning on doing a comparison video between Copic and Ohuhu, and if I don't go back and use Ohuhu because I haven't used them in so long, how am I supposed to make a very good informative comparison? So you can look forward to that in the future. Let me know if you're interested in that. I know back when I made my first Copic marker video, people said they would really like to see a direct comparison, so that's what I'm working on now, but I want it to be good, so I've met a few setbacks, but we'll get there. So I thought it would be best if I practice with the Ohuhu again since it had been so long, and now I have some very similar recent experience with both of the markers, and I should be able to make a better video, I'm hoping. Fingers crossed. Moving on to the hair, I was really happy with where this whole illustration was going, and of course there's like mistakes here and there, but I was very happy with, you know, the overall results, and I was having a lot of fun. It was so much fun. Anyway, so going into the hair, I decided to experiment and try something different. So what I did was I outlined the whole section of the hair with the bullet nib, and then I created sort of like sections of hair, like blobs of hair. I don't know what you would call them, but like, you know, just to get an idea of where the strands would be. So there's just giant blobby sections of hair, and then I started coloring in where the shine would be with like a lighter color. And then once that was done, I went in with the darker hair color and I filled in all of these sections that didn't have the light color to try and create those shines of hair. And to blend those two very different colors, I switched back to the lighter color of hair and blended between the very dark and the very light, and it creates that gradient between the two colors. And of course, I'm using the chisel nib for this because I want it to blend very, very thoroughly, and I'm going to need a lot of ink to do that, so that is why I'm using the chisel and not the bullet. Does this make sense? I'm hoping. Hair shines. That's what I mean. I don't know. It's not my favorite part of the drawing. I don't think it ruined the drawing, that's for sure. But I definitely need more experience with hair, and I'm going to continue to do that because drawing big hair, I just love characters with big hair. So I'm going to have to get good at it eventually, and if I keep doing it, eventually I think it'll be the way I imagine it in my head. So we'll stick with it. We'll get there. I'm using the Prismacolor Premier 03 fine liner to outline all of the sections of this drawing, and I've kind of been doing it in sections because I didn't go in and just add the line art before the color, which I would usually do because I've been kind of having problems with smudging. So I was like, let me take a step back, reevaluate this, and I'm like, okay, I think I'll just add the liner in later because I like to go with a lot of pastel tones, and sometimes pastel tones just for some reason, from my experience, they like to just grab that dark black fine liner and just streak it all over the place. So I was like, not today. I'm going to use the liner last. So who's the champion here? I think it's me. Maybe I'm smarter than markers, I guess. That's not saying much. Oh, and now I am working on what is probably my favorite part of the drawing, and that is this background. And I'm doing a very abstract, fun, poppy, pop art background with a lot of circles. It's basically all circles. And I'm kind of continuing her color scheme into the background. So it's just very bright and saturated, and I just love it. It was so much fun. And the reason I'm able to do this is because lately I've just been like, who cares what the art turns out like? I'm just going to enjoy what I'm doing. And because of that, I'm not really afraid of destroying the art because whatever the art looks like at the end doesn't really matter. It's about enjoying the process and just, you know, making the art. So because I'm not really worried about ruining it, I'm able to have more, or I'm kind of just more free to experiment with the art, and adding in a background after I'm kind of happy with the way the art looks is kind of something that would have scared me in the past, but I was like, nope, I just feel like doing circles, so I'm going to add a bunch of circles to the background. And then I had it like this, and I was like, oh, that's kind of done. But then I was like, no, let's add more circles. So I started adding more and more circles, and I'm so much more happier with the way it turned out. I think it just, It just feels like a full illustration, you know? And I'm just very happy with it. And if I had kind of fell back to what my normal attitude towards art would be, is like, oh, I'm really happy, you know, with the way this character looks, and I'm too scared to ruin it by trying to add some kind of background in post, you know, basically. But I was like, you know, I'm just gonna do it anyway, and I'm very happy that I did, because that experiment really paid off. It doesn't always pay off, obviously. Sometimes you can ruin your drawing, but not being afraid to ruin your drawing can award you with these kind of results sometimes, and I'm happy with that. I'm very, very happy with it. I had a lot of fun, and I really hope I'm like expressing and conveying my emotions properly here, because I see a lot of negativity in my comment section, and it's not towards me. It's people talking about their own art, and that just makes me so sad, because when I was younger, I used to do that to myself too, and I still do, but I've been really working on myself and trying to really look at art and see what is the most important part to me. And it's not the end result, because I barely ever look back at my art. What I love is the drawing, and when I do look back at that, I can see the fun that I had. And sometimes when you look back on your art right after you made it, you just see the mistakes. But now that I'm older, I look back at my art and I see the amount of fun I had when I was drawing it, and I can remember the things I was thinking when I was drawing it. It's like the weirdest thing, especially when I'm like looking back like old art from when I was like 14, and I like remember who I was thinking about, and who done me wrong in middle school. In a way, it's like creating art creates this weird time capsule of memories, and they're like implanted into the art. That sounds like a really good idea for maybe a story. I should probably wrap this up. I've been talking for a while. Thank you guys for watching. Today's video was definitely proof, not only to myself, but hopefully to maybe some of you, that you don't need Copic markers to create some of the same effects that Copic markers do. Copic markers are very, very expensive and 10 times the price of Ohuhu markers, and maybe they make things easier, but sometimes saving the money is much more important. And look, you can still create those soft blended techniques with these markers, and that is what I set off to prove. Now, I need to go work on my comparison video where I show the direct differences and similarities between these markers. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys all next week, and I hope you have a delicious evening full of waffles. Bye!